Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 553rd episode of Constructed Criticism. I am your host, Mason, joined by my co-host, Abe Stein. Abe, how you doing?
I'm doing fantastic this third day of Passover. You have any leavened bread recently, Mason?
Any leavened bread? Now, I'm not sure what the difference in leavened bread is. I had a wheat sandwich earlier today. Like, what
Oh,
sandwich
sounds
did you
like
have?
you have.
What? Wow.
Do you have like a regular slice of bread?
I haven't had just a regular. I had it. Well, I mean, it was a regular slice of bread with things in between.
Yeah, that's already. All right.
Okay.
Well, I'm glad you're living. I'm glad you're living large for me and my chosen people out here.
You know
Much
what?
love.
I'll have another sandwich for you tomorrow, King. Spencer is out this week. He is busy taking care of some family stuff, but we still have an episode coming out, and this one is actually spearheaded by Abe when we were doing our planning for the episode. So we're just going to hop right into our main topic, which is sort of learning your openings. And Abe, you're the one who really you pitched this idea and wanted to take it. So what was speaking about this and what we're going to be getting into today?
Yeah. So something that has come up for me in coaching and even came up for me recently in like learning breach in kind of the tight window that I did for the RCs was just, really reinforcing the value of understanding what like your early game is supposed to look like. I think that, chess as a game, always has this concept of like, if you've ever tried to learn chess or whatever, like there's a ton of just, oh, this is the best opening, right? You're playing a mirror match, someone's on the play, but like knowing how you should play your first few turns and how that informs the rest of your game is like something that's basically solved because it's the part of the game that has the least variance. It always starts from the same place.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of value in coming into it knowing how you should play those first few turns and what that means. Except in Magic, it's a lot different because you have a different deck than your opponent, and right, you kind of have your own. Each deck does different things, and it still is just as important to know when you're sitting down to play, play tournaments or even just start playtesting a deck or an idea, like understanding what your openings are, and that was something that really was reaffirmed to me in the last few months or so as I've been kind of honestly like learning more decks and trying to really master or pick up and like run through more decks in a way that I haven't done in a long time. Now that I have a little bit less time to be kind of constantly engaged in Magic,
Mm-hmm.
and so something that I felt like would be really valuable for you guys, the listeners, because it really there's so many areas of your game where it brings a lift to really know when you're sitting down to play what is it that you're trying to do in these first few turns, what is it your deck is trying to do in the first few turns, and how to really build that understanding and leverage that to seeing better results in your over the table play.
Definitely, yeah. I actually had a coaching session today where we were on a mulligan to 5, and they had a hand, and I was like, yeah, I mean, you would never keep this on 7 or 6 because it just doesn't do what our deck's trying to do. But this, we don't really have a 4 that's sort of winnable in this game, so we're going to keep it here. And we had a conversation about that a little bit, kind of this idea of like, our bars change because we're at a mulligan, but, we can't even have that kind of conversation if we haven't done what you're talking about, right? And we don't even know what we're trying to look for in these early stages in this kind of matchup.
Yeah, and I think the London Mulligan really kind of put this skill front and center, because you have this choice over what your hand looks like when you mulligan, and even when you're looking at keeping a hand, right? You should think through what does this look like if maybe I see the same hand but down a card. It's not just about the raw resources, but it's also about what is my hand accomplishing and is this good? And I think that it depends really on the type of deck you play. Right, different strategies have different, parameters for what they need in their kind of developing stages of the game. But understanding that and knowing how to develop, even a working understanding of that for a deck quickly, I think really just changes and is a mark to me of someone who's like really like if I'm playing a tournament, I'm watching matches in RSQ. If I see someone who really I can tell has a game plan when they're playing out their first few turns and is already thinking on that, that shows a lot of promise to me, and that's a pretty clear signal when I'm playing against someone who's also playing on that level. Sets them apart in my mind of like, okay, they're really being intentional here, and they really understand what they're trying to do, and so it's just a good thing to get, I think, the practice of, and something that if you're not already doing in trying to make sure before you even, I mean, shuffle up and draw that first hand or enter that first league or play that first ladder match, really trying to think about, what is it that my deck does in the early turns. I think it's a lost opportunity for you. So
Definitely. Especially in these older formats, right? I mean, like standard has a lot of 1 mana and 2 mana spells, but like if you look at modern, if you're playing a Moxen deck, like you probably have like 4 or 5 plays available to you on turn one, right? And thinking about how you want to sequence is so important. I played a Mox Opal deck at a little local thing this weekend, and some games I let on Mox first before my land, and sometimes I was like, wow, I really can't afford to let this Mox get like force negation here, so I'm gonna like lead on my land first and hold up this spell pierce to make sure I can fight for it. And little things like that, it had a big difference because it meant I couldn't play a surveil land, right? And knowing sort of what I can and can't do, and those sort of little things have huge implications. It's going back all the way, obviously, to Legacy, but also, in Standard, the difference between knowing when you're supposed to be higher clawing versus Heartfire Hearing versus Swift Spearing in Mono Red is a very, important thing to look at and understand the range of in your deck. So it does have huge implications.
yeah, and I think it's really good you point out that like that example even from modern, right? I think that combo decks almost present the most straightforward, like combo decks and aggro decks present the most straightforward examples of this because they are decks with very clear baked in game plans, right? As an aggressive deck or even a deck like Convoke, which is more of like a kind of critical mass synergy deck, still pretty aggressive. It's like it's about maximizing the draw you have in front of you and kind of making sure you get to your goal as fast as possible, or as effectively as possible. But even outside of that, like it really does it does matter to know those things. But I think that as we're entering a modern RCQ season, it's like I think modern is probably the format where this matters the most because the games are more condensed. And I think right in older formats, the games are fewer turns. There's more powerful things going on, at least for the most part, right? The decks are trying to operate at a different speed, and so even more so in those formats, I think it's important that you really come in, practice an understanding of your openings, and also, I mean, right, the more you understand your own, the more you can put into understanding other decks openings and trying to figure out how those all play in together. I know we talked about that on the show before, but I think that it's just really important to know about. So yeah, that's really the what we mean by learning your opening. I don't know, Mason, if we touched on a few benefits there. I don't know if you have any outside of like just that understanding that we didn't touch on, or what your thoughts are on that.
No, I think that it has a lot of benefits in that regard, and we talked about a bunch of them. I think there's a few. One thing that kind of jumps out to me that's a benefit of practicing this that we maybe didn't mention that is important is this is something you can do when you don't have time to play a whole game, right? Like a good example is Abe and I recorded a little early for the podcast today. I had just 10 minutes to kill, and I ended up doing something different. But if you had like 10 or 15 minutes where you had some free time, that's something that I always think about. It's very important to people. A lot of people don't have time to dedicate a bunch of time to Magic, but being able to think about this for, like that 15 minutes while your oil's getting changed, or while you're waiting for a meeting, or like while you're eating your lunch, this is a little thing that can be super helpful and set you up for a lot more success to, jump straight into your games when you have time to actually play and be on a much more solid footing. And then kind of part two, that is, we talk about jumping straight into the games. I think this just helps you be a little bit quicker in tournaments, right? When you're actually kind of have some of these solid ideas, you obviously need to double check your work when you're playing the big tournament, but you're not having to start from zero, right? It's sort of like we know what kind of paintings we're looking for, and now we're just kind of examining what we were given, right? And instead of trying to be like, what am I actually looking for? Which is something that we see players, and you mentioned this, like RCQs a lot, where I watch my opponents sort of figure things out in real time, and they had just done this little practice thing we're talking about today. They maybe would have, dodged a small mistake or been less mentally drained at the end of the day when it came time for, that top 8 match where they make that one small error. Maybe they don't make that in the other world, and now, they're on to the top 4. These little things do add up.
Yeah, I think it's actually funny. There's something that Jonathan's kind of always said that was like, he was like, it's inexcusable if you keep your opening 7 and you have to think for more than like, and you're on the play, you have to think for like 30 seconds, or even if you have to think more than like 10 seconds on your first land drop, or like what your turn 1 is. Like, you looked at the hand, you kept it, you should know. And I think that really just extends into like beyond that, right? You should be able to shortcut that in your head, especially if you're preparing for an RCQ, you're preparing for an RC, right? An event you really care about, and you're putting practice time into your deck. Part of that is gaining that familiarity, but by really targeting it down to, this early section of the game, I mean, it gives you, like you said, more of that mental energy up front to pay attention to other ways the game's develop. I think that, it also leads to you just playing faster, right? And also, I've found that when I started doing this and started being really comfortable with like a deck and how it's opening, like for the first 5-6 matches I played, if I really understand my deck, I'm able to then think more about, oh, what did my opponent start mean? What am I looking for in their plays and how they line up with mine, rather than, oh, is this the right land to play? Because my mana requirements in my deck might be this, or, oh, I need to get this card in play so that I can set up for my next turn. And you start thinking about the game in a broader sense, I think, when you really have taken the time to learn your openings.
It also,
And
I'm sorry, I just 100% agree. You just said it like you kind of think. I just think you fully do. You know what I mean? I just want to back you up with a big, like, personally hearty yes there.
yeah, I mean, I definitely feel like I do. I don't want to speak for everyone.
Oh, of
Maybe
course,
maybe it
yeah.
is hard for you to just think about that, but no, it's definitely something that I think that it's, like I said at the beginning of the episode, I think it's the mark of a player who is really on their stuff to know, like, not only what their deck's openings are, but the opponent's deck's openings are. When you talk about people who are like masters of their format, I think about the anecdote that was shared, I think it was on Resleevables, about what Brad Nelson did to become the best standard player of all time.
Mm-hmm.
And Brad's answer was, he would just play out the first, like, right, he'd play out enough games of all the decks in the format so that he knew, based on just what his opponent was doing in the first couple of turns, he already knew what was going on in their hand because he understood what would be different if it wasn't, right? Like that level of just knowing, like, the back of your hand, what every deck is trying to do. Obviously, it's more complicated than that, and Magic is a bigger game than that, and games are longer than just the first 2 or 3 turns. But the amount of edge and the amount of information that you have to work with there that can really start to set you apart in terms of your results, I think is really real.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you might be wondering, if you bought in to, okay, I really want to get good at this, how do I start getting better at this? I know I talked about this, I think last month, but for me, the number one way I do this is just gold fishing. Like, just drawing hands and, like, playing them out, really, like, getting the deck in my hands, even if it's just proxying it up, and using that as a way to just get the practice in, not only for, like, the mechanics of things, but when I say that, and I think I said it on Grindcast, I said it on this show, on CC. When I say that I spent 3 hours in Portland just drawing hands and playing out the first 4 turns with Breach, and that was really where it clicked for me. So many things I had done wrong in playing my matches on Moto. I can't imagine how, if I had done those things in the other order, how much differently my, like, playtesting process would have been, because I would have had a better understanding of, oh, this is what my deck should be doing, and this is what I should be accomplishing every game. Like these are the cards that actually matter, and this is the game plan that really matters that I should be trying to execute, rather than kind of trying to rely on heuristics for other decks that didn't really apply. Um, and I think it's really basic. But I don't know, you Mason. I feel like I rarely even at least until Portland, I rarely even thought about this as something I should be working in time for when I was preparing for a deck. And I think it's something that even like I don't even hear people talk about. It's a lot of just you know copy the deck list from Goldfish, go on to Magic Online, go on to Arena, and just start playing. But I think taking steps between that, it really does change things.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've heard you talk about this a few times now, and it is I kind of made the observation too that like no one really talks about this, and it's something I've done for a long time. When I like sleeve a deck up for an event, I like will get my deck ready, and then once it's ready, I like goldfish it a bit. You know what I mean? But not like before. And I thought about that. And I was like, I definitely never was doing it consciously with the thoughts of this is good practice. It was always sort of like want to make sure my deck's kind of shuffled before I even get there. You know what I mean? So I'm not having to shuffle like 30 times at the tournament or whatever, and just sort of wanting to like make sure I have like the some of the physical movements down on what I need to be doing, because I play so little before often with tournaments, like with my deck actually in paper these days. And honestly, for a long time now, that it was super important. But it made me remember that when I first started playing Amulet, Abe, I would only goldfish it because I just didn't play Moto at the time, and Moto was a little bit worse than it is now. Break's done some great quality of life improvements, and Amulet's already a Herculean task to play these days on Magic Online, let alone back then. And I goldfished a ton of Amulet. And I spent a lot of time, too, recreating board states that I watched, Dom Harvey, Edgar McAleish, those sort of players play on the SCG tour, and sort of learn the deck via them. I had barely played that deck in paper when I hot-baited my first SCG playing it. I had goldfished it a ton, and I never really made that realization before until sort of hearing you talk about it and sort of reflecting, and then reflecting on this episode, getting ready for it. So I think I'm starting to come around to, I think it has huge gains, especially for decks that have like clear plans on what winning looks like, but have lots of ways to get there, if that makes sense, right? So like mono red might not be something that the average red deck I'm super interested in doing this for, but like the current red deck in standard I might be a lot more interested in, right? Because it actually has a lot more play to it, and a sort of a combo-y nature. And so that's a long-winded way of saying that I think this does actually matter, and it's something I've done in the past, but never really thought about actively. I'm going to try to work into things going forward now.
Yeah, I think that you hit the nail on the head. It's like I think AIM was the perfect example. I actually have been thinking about, and especially as right now, my focus is tuned towards standard, so that I can be really as in the know as possible in these like 2 months leading up to the Pro Tour.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm still going to touch on some modern and keep an eye on it. And one of the things, goals for myself is I don't really have a mainstay modern deck right now, is to not just be in the zone of, well, I'll just play Boros, or I'll just play whatever deck I feel comfortable with.
Yeah.
But to really step outside of that, and like learning Amulet is one of my goals for modern in the short term. So like one of my thoughts is, yeah, like I should just be goldfishing this deck and just practicing it, because it is a deck that has so much mechanical intricacy and so many game actions to execute, that if you aren't thinking about that, or even so many parameters of like, oh, maybe this is close, let me see how it plays out, right? Can I keep a hand that does this and still achieve, oh, I want to win with backup on turn 4. Does this hand do that, right? Does a hand like this do that?
Mm-hmm.
Asking questions of the deck and then doing that. And I think also, even with decks that are less linear, decks like mid-range decks, or even some control decks, it can be really valuable to just like get an understanding of where your mana might be pinched in a way that can be hard to visualize on paper, right? On paper, I think sometimes even playing a deck like Azorius Control, you're like, well, I have a bunch of 2 mana interactive spells and draw spells and sweepers, and I just kind of weave them all in. However, but knowing like, oh well, you know, what does my turn shape up to be? How does my mana develop? Or with mid range decks, like if I have to play this removal spell on 2, how hard is it then for me to like weave in playing my 2-drop, or vice versa? Right? How much time am I really, or how much mana virtually am I really committing to my decisions, knowing that now I'm, in my hand deck, I'm going to have this fork, or maybe my draw really does want to play, my 2-drop, try to hit his land drops that maybe draws cards, or whatever it is, set up my card advantage engine versus, I need to answer something. And those, I think, are like delicate balances that you don't really encounter. And some of it is, you play with the imagination and you say, oh, well, I'm playing as mono red and they have a creature, so I got to kill it. And then, or I'm playing as control, so this Doomblade is dead and I need to not think about it. But regardless, I think it's still good to just mentally prepare for those situations. And I think it really does help you when you arrive at those very common scenarios that you'll encounter with your deck, be more comfortable in making that decision, because like you said, it just narrows it down and helps you create those shortcuts to know what is it I'm looking to accomplish. And even deck to deck or matchup to matchup, right, you can even start to think broader than that if you already understand the baseline of this is what I want to do if my opponent is a paperback and they're just going to fall over, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'd go as far as even to say, like, lots of times you can even think about things like, all right, I'm going to play this, and then, you have an Emery start with your Breach or your Just Cast NC deck, right? And the Emery dies, and it's like, okay, what would I do from here, right? And that's something that you could, you can even do looking at opening hands, right? And mulliganing a bunch, which is one of the things that I think, this goldfishing, like, has the predecessor to, of like just looking at a ton of opening hands and thinking about how would you sequence and what would you do if they discharge on one versus Ocelot on one versus Ragavan on one, right? And just like think about those things and then thinking about, okay, what's the difference between Grazer put a bounce land in versus Amulet on one versus Saga Pass, versus Saga Amulet Pass, like those sort of things are all things that you can do, and you can goldfish and think about these little things, right? Like once you get past the paper bag sort of stage, right? Like there is a little bit of depth you can add to it as well.
Definitely. I mean, I think that like in your example there, right? Maybe you look at a hand and you think it's one you should keep, or maybe you're not sure, you play it out, and then you see, okay, maybe this hand was, at least with the way that this iteration of it like drew, it was a bit reliant on this Emery. And if that Emery had died, maybe this hand isn't one that I should be really excited to keep, and I should think about it a little bit harder. And, if the Emery dying is a problem, what is my opponent playing? Is it likely that it's going to die? Is it unlikely it's going to die? If it lives, what's the upside, right? You get to start asking better questions about what you're actually trying to accomplish with your cards and what weight the card bears in your game plan. And how that factors into your hand, right? Now we're talking about some really high-level decisions and high-level thinking that you're going to be able to unlock simply through this exercise of, right, let me become familiar with my deck. Let me even do this, play some matches, or go to the LGS and, play some practice match with my friends, or play my weekly event, and then come back home and continue to do this. And I think that really, like we said, it's not talked about enough, but I think that kind of, even just taking the time to do something outside of playing a game with someone else just to become more familiar with your deck, or a deck that you're even interested in or you don't know much about, right? You can learn all these things about decks in a format without having to invest the time or the money, or taking the risk of maybe I do want to try this deck, but I don't want to put 10 tickets down on a league, or 3 hours of my time into it, and I just want to kind of get a feel for it before I do that. And all of it, even if it just gives you the takeaway of, okay, this is kind of what the hands look like and how they kind of play out and how they develop, can make it more real when you think about playing against those decks in paper.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think it's something that just should be thought about more and should be done more, really.
Yeah, so I mean, that's I think we touched on everything on Mason. Is there anything else you want to talk about with
No,
this?
no, I feel like we got through everything that at least I wanted to say. Sounds like you as well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I just think that it was something that really I can't stress enough was really it was a return to like fundamentals for me that I didn't even intend to do. I just couldn't sleep one night before before the Friday before an RC, and it really kind of was one of those aha moments of unlocking kind of the importance of this at a foundational level, and I felt it was really good to share with you. So um, hopefully it's great for you guys listening. If it is, leave a comment. If it isn't, also leave a comment. Um, but I think that's going to do for our main topic here.
Yeah, definitely. And speak to that second point there of if it isn't, leave a comment. Like, we love to hear the pushback too, you know? Like, if you disagree or there's something you want to challenge about something like this, we love to hear that sort of stuff. So make sure to reach out to us. But that is going to do it for the main segment here. We're going to move on to our Patreon question. If you want to support the show, you go to patreon.com/ccmtg to support the show. One of the benefits of that is you get to ask the Patreon question each and every week. And this week's question is, what is your approach when tackling week one or early in a new format at a competitive event? It seems it seems hard to really have a good sideboard if there are drastic changes like Dragonstorm appears to be doing to standard. Uh, I'm going to start things off a little bit here, Abe. This is one that we get quite often, I think, and it's because it's a very, reasonable and sort of challenging thing, right? This is why if you listen to the show now for 553 episodes, you've heard this come up a bunch of times. And it is a tough thing to do. The main thing that I always tell people, because I think we could do maybe we even should do a whole episode on this if we haven't already, is you should look at what is going on with the decks and think about what are their strengths and weaknesses, specifically the new one, and how those will interact with other decks and sort of work from there, but try not to overreact. Overreaction is how people typically end up in these really awkward and bad spots. So, if you look at our current standard, the Quarry Cutter decks are really making a big splash on standard at the moment, right? It's sort of this new style of red, Izzety, aggro decks, excuse me. And looking at, okay, what is Quarry Cutter good against? What are its advantages and disadvantages over the past mono red decks, and then thinking about, okay, are there things that I can do that can line up well against here? So things like a Braid jump to mind if you want to actually kill the Quarry Cutter. It obviously probably got value ahead of time, but that's a way to answer that. You could Temporary Lockdown, you could Authority of the Consuls, right? Those are just a couple things that are all good cards against normal mono red that have overlap here and are good in different spots and to varying degrees, but it's sort of that first step of sort of what am I going to do and try and work from there. I think we could go a lot deeper, but I think that's sort of opening up a can of worms. So that's what I have to say on it, Abe. What are some of your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think that it's a great question because it is really true. I mean, there's always changes happening, especially in formats like standard when these new sets come out and people are trying the new cards, and it's very difficult to find your bearings in like that level of volatility. The way that I try to approach these um, is to think about what are the most important cards and just make sure I have answers for those cards and for those game plans, right? So like looking at this standard format, I think Corey Steelcutter is a great example, and even your mentioning of a Braid there. It's funny. I right before we were recording the episode, Mason, when I texted you, I was playing a blue-red prowess mirror where my opponent had a Braids in their sideboard, and I did not. It was not close. I got smoked. They just blew up my steel cutters, and they had like one of their own, and it just ran away with the game. And I think that when you think about it as right, the format is still in flux. It's hard to say what the very specifics are going to be, but if you know what those linchpin key cards are and what your game plans are against those cards or those game plans, and you just focus on making sure you have a way to execute for that, it doesn't, especially when you're taking a step from, oh, this was a really defined standard format before this. Now I'm stepping into a really undefined standard format after this. It can feel like, oh, this feels worse, but actually, everyone's deck is kind of responding to the volatility. And so just by playing broader answers, um, thinking about things more at a bird's eye, and then being specific and saying, I need to have answers for the most important card in the matchup in decks that are like this. And just approaching it that way rather than trying to get too fancy with it. That's what's found success for me. And I think that often applies really just to bigger tournament fields in general, because there's a lot more variance in them. The more that you have, right, a sampling of people bringing decks, the more you see different decks out there, and the more you have a chance to run into them. The same thing early on in Standard, where there's just not a consensus so much on what people should be playing or do play, and so you play against a lot more different things. So it's best to come in with a sideboard that is able to answer a lot, but is still thinking about the most important problems.
Definitely, yeah. One of the things that's one of the things I like about the Joculus, Jessica Oculus deck in Standard, right? Is it it has lots of different answers to lots of different problems available in its colors. It sees a lot of its deck, all while sort of putting the pressure on the opponent if they ever stumble, right? And just being sort of a deck that moves through itself really quickly, interacts. So, well, I don't think that's like, I'm not saying run to that deck for your RC mini or whatever. I do think that's a deck that like goes underappreciated and sort of excels at moments like this where things are unclear, and struggles in more defined metagames where maybe where people have settled is really tough against it. So
yeah, I think we should definitely do a whole episode on early format Standard. I think we should think about that, because that seems like a really, really rich idea. I have a lot more I could say on that.
Yeah, definitely. We should make a note in our Discord so we don't forget our personal one, that is. Anyways, let's move on really quickly to Always Improving. Always Improving is the main point of the show. It's something that we are very passionate about. And Abe, it's your turn to go first. What was your Always Improving moment in this last week?
Yeah, so my Always Improving moment this week actually came. There are a couple things I'm going to talk about, but I think the one I'm going to talk about is from yesterday. So, for those who don't know, or just meeting me for the first time on this episode, I work as the branch manager of a bank in a local regional bank in my area. I have a very small team, like 3 or 4 of us, and well, 3.5 of us, we're part-timer. Anyway, the two employees I was supposed to work with yesterday, Mason, they both called out. And they're both sick, couldn't come in, couldn't get anyone else, had to get people from other branches of the bank to come help us. Needless to say, my day was exhausting. I was kind of wearing all hats, doing the jobs of 3 people with the help of 2 to kind of be my minions, as I kind of directed them through how we do things in our branch, and was kind of bearing that executive load. And then after that, I was exhausted, had every excuse in the world to say, you know what, I'm going to kick my feet up. And you know what I did after that, Mason? I went straight to the gym. I got in my workout. I came back. I played some matches of Standard, as I told myself I would, to continue my goal of being really prepared for the Pro Tour. And then even did a little draft to treat myself, and just carried on my routine. And just, I think that not making excuses for myself and not letting myself fall victim to what would have been a fair justification of like why it was I didn't do what I set out to do when I, made my plans for the week and was starting my day. That's something that I've been really bad about a lot of times. Like I think I've really been one to let myself off easy when I feel like there's a good reason for it, but centering myself around my goals and like the long-term goals for myself of like, I really want to be prepared for this Pro Tour, and I really want to, have a good motivation for like going to the gym and doing my cardio and, getting my workout in, which is that I want to go to a bunch more concerts and like not be exhausted afterwards. I want to like go and dance and like mosh and have a good time, and then like not hurt all over the next day or not be gassed by like the second act. So, like just keeping those things in mind and doing that to just build on that, and not giving myself the out. it was like I didn't really think about it until I was lying in bed, but I was like, wow, I really like pushed myself to do that. And I think just in general, it's something that I want to keep doing more of, and it's definitely something that I have not been great about in the past. So that's my always improvement for the week.
I love that. I think, holding yourself to maybe a higher bar, right? When there's things that you really care about, like stuff like this. Because I think you are right when you were like, it's. I would be hard pressed to find someone who's like, doesn't know you and doesn't know all of, like what these goals mean to you, and they sort of just like you tell them what happened on the day, and they go, and you say, "Do you think I should, take some time off and give myself some slack?" I think most people go, "Yeah," right? But I think it's great that you sort of pushed through and did it, and then felt good about it still, right? Like, and ultimately we're happy with it. I think it's really important to remember that part of it too, because this will not be unfortunately, not the last day that's stressful, or the last day where something like this comes up. So I really love that. My always pretty moment comes from playing a lot of limited, and it's really just engaging and playing limited. I don't super love the act of drafting, um, which is like a Magic players around the world went as I said that. And I haven't super loved a lot of limited formats gameplay. I wouldn't even say that I love Dragonstorm, but it's something that like I just have as like a weakness, and part of it's like, while I don't think this is the case, because I think I'm pretty good at understanding why I do or don't like something, a part of me does wonder, like, is it because I haven't put time in, and it's like I'm worse at something like this? And either way, when I get back to the Pro Tour, I need to get better. I need to be better at limited for when that time comes. And so I just wanted to put some time in and just have been doing that. I haven't drafted today or yesterday, but yesterday was super busy and I didn't get to do anything super relaxing. So, so be life. But, I've been trying to get at least a draft a day in or watch some friends draft, and watched a lot of like the limited coverage of this last weekend with the GP in Denver, and just tried to, really become one with the format and try to appreciate it for what it is. And sort of what I talked about on the podcast of like, if you like Magic and you like Standard, it's fine to not engage if you don't, like this version of the format, but don't complain and try and find the fun in the things that you're doing. And I've been trying to do that with this limited format as well, with, kind of my own, much rather be doing some other things in comparison to it. But know that this sort of hard work, I mean, it's not really hard work, right? It's drafting, but what feels more like work than normal Magic does, will pay off in the end, and I'll be happier for it. So that's sort of my always improving moment, is just sort of, trudging through these early days of limited mud, as it were.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. Like putting the time into, and I think like you're talking about, right, getting better at limited for the Pro Tour.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to necessarily have this much time to like get that much better, but the more, at least I've found, the more you like absorb a format and understand it, the more you get better at kind of cracking the code
Mm-hmm.
in future formats and kind of understanding the meta games that evolve and what's there. And so I'm glad that you're trying to evolve from 17 land green white combat trick and creature deck Mason to to you know draft master Mason.
Yeah, I would say I'm curious what you have to say about this, Abe. So let me get your opinion on it, because we haven't talked about this. I would say there's two things I've always tried to do, but I do often end up playing, like creature limited decks, and that's often just because it's like kind of what I know how to do, right? Sort of well. But the two things I'm really taking to heart are, one, I am drafting the cards I'm given. If that makes sense. Like, I'm really thinking about what can I make work with what I'm seeing or have seen from previous packs, right? Like, okay, I got this. I like Pastor Crater Hoof or whatever. And I've been seeing a lot of green cards. I might be able to actually wield this Crater Hoof as an example. And then sort of part two is a little counter to this, but still in the same vein of, I just don't care what my first 7 picks are. I try really hard. It's just like, okay, I'm gonna kind of draft the cards I think are best and make sense given what I'm seeing, and not married to anything. I opened, some bomb dragon or whatever, it doesn't matter. Like if that's, I'm not going to be married to that bomb dragon if other things are open and I'm getting a lot of clear signals that maybe something on the opposite side of the spectrum is open. Now this format has a lot of 5-color decks that you can draft and stuff like that, so sometimes it ends up working out either way. But I'm trying to take a much more like, I would say disciplined or adult approach to limited.
Yeah, I think that this format especially rewards doing that more than others do because of its kind of soupy nature where you play a lot of colors and
Mm-hmm.
maybe you're even able to splash like taking a powerful card in general early, it's just much more likely to make your deck than in other formats, right? If we were talking about maybe not, I guess maybe Aether Drift is a good example. No, Aether Drift's not great, but anyway, we're playing Foundations and you take, a black rare
Mm-hmm.
and then there's no black cards, like, or maybe you take a multicolored rare that's like black white and you don't wind up in black or white, then you're not going to play that rare, and so that pick, maybe you could have taken a card that would have made your deck, and that's kind of a waste.
Mm-hmm.
But in a format like this one, maybe you do just wind up with incidental mana fixing, so you can actually cast this black white rare that's really strong, or or anything like that. But no, I think it sounds like you're really taking on the task of like drafting the hard way, and in the way of saying I'm going to set out to build the best deck out of the cards I see, and also try to take in the information that's sent to me by the signals sent through what I know is and is not coming back out of packs that I've seen,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of trying to work with that to get into a lane and draft a good deck. I think that that's like so much more of drafting, especially like uh, at like the Pro Tour level, when you're doing like pod drafts or like at the Spotlight series. This came up a bit in the coverage of just there's a real value to understanding what is going on at the table and what your neighbors are doing, because when you work collaboratively, you all end up with better decks than if you're fighting over colors and kind of cutting each other at the knees. And knowing how to read those signals or what those things are, I think that's really the difference between someone who really understands a format, like being able to do that really well and is a great drafter, versus someone who might not have that same skill set.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I also feel like this is the thing that is most likely to transfer long term, right? Like if I get this, if I get better at doing this, this is the thing that will help me the most in got Final Fantasy, Spider-Man, Space Set, which are our next 3 sets, Um, so
Yeah, I mean the Pro Tour, my first Pro Tour Shadows over Innistrad, our team Tweets for Days had the best limited win rate of all the teams, and that was in the era of like Channel Fireball, Pantheon. We were not a small team. We were like 9 or somewhere between 9 and 12 BTQ winners and GP top 8ers, all East Coast players. And one of the things we really identified was we had a backdoor strategy. We understood the color flow, so if you needed to if you found your color was cut, we knew what to pivot into and what the key cards were in that color. And we also something I learned during that process was from Jonathan Morawski, John O'Miser on Moto, like an unsung hero, all time great, really, of the early eras of the Pro Tour. And he was just like, well, if you take this card that is better than all of the cards in that color combined, and you wind up spending your whole pack taking up 7 or 8 playables in that color, you should just do that. That's just going to make your deck better. And when you think about it that way, it becomes a lot easier to not get married to those early picks. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's great that you're really taking that stance and that approach of building a solid draft model of how you want to draft, rather than kind of the one that was leading you down the path of boring old creature decks with pump spells.
Nothing boring about creature decks and pump spells. Let me tell you about it. It is a blast to get a little +2/+2 lifelink. Ay caramba. What a feeling.
Oh yeah. So you're a lover of what was that? It was an old Donald Smith poll from like 2020 where it was like, what's the best combat trick? And it was a poll where it was like, single white +2/+2 set mechanic, one in the green +3/+3 bonus ability. Like, you know, like all the like stock template combat tricks they have in play design.
Yeah.
You love all those. That's all for you.
I love them all. What can I say? Oh my goodness. Well, that is going to do it for this week's episode. If you want to support the show, you can do that by going to YouTube, sharing this on social media, or checking out one of our sponsors, untap.gg. The link is in the description. Is a great arena deck tracker. And then there is Mana Traders as well. We are working with them. And our code is CCMTG1. This is for April. We're halfway through it, so it'll be CCMGG2 for next month in May if you're a bit behind and catching up. So just to give you a little sneak peek on what it'll be then. And you can check out the swag store as well. If you want to find me, you can find me on Twitter at Mason E. Clark, and you can reach out for coaching there, or via my email, masoneclark@gmail.com. I am accepting clients. I know there have been a lot of people. I got a lot of messages like, hey, I know you're on vacation. Can I like schedule something? We can definitely schedule something. And I have lots of spots opening up. And if you want to find me elsewhere, you can check me out on Twitch, twitch.tv/TheMasonClark. And you can check me out on various different coverage things as well. I'll see you around there. Abe, where can people find you?
People can find me over at Blue Sky at More Nothings. You can find me on Twitter at More Nothings. You can also DM me on either platform or email me at morenothings@gmail.com for coaching. I will have a few spots in the coming month, although I will have to probably tighten up right after the RC as I head into the PT. So if you're looking to set up some sessions, please just reach out and leave coaching in the description if you send me an email.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for listening to this week's episode. We'll see you next week for another episode of CCMTG.
Magic, magic, magic.